Our next topic is 0 to 1 Smart City and Neighborhood, What to Learn. This session will focus on the evolution of smart cities from a technological focus to a more human-centered approach. We're honored to have with us today Professor Ellen Shiradia, the Deputy Head of the Department of Urban Planning and Design at the University of Hong Kong to present this topic. Please join me in giving Professor Ellen a warm round of applause.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Great pleasure to be here and to talk about smart city. 0 to 1 smart city and neighborhood, what to learn? It's a big question. I don't think I will answer it this afternoon, but let's start. Okay. I'll just kind of like go through a brief history, not that long, about smart city, and especially technology-driven city making and city vision. Then I look at a little bit about what are the current conditions, and a question that we all have is like, how do you recognize a success story of smart city? So. Then I go into kind of like 3 different kind of examples, and then we kind of look at what we can learn from it, from those. So I won't go so far, but technology-driven city is not new. It's about almost like 2 centuries old. There's quite many instances, and you can see some image of it. So in that sense, there's no agreed definition of a smart city. It is a matter of context, as we've seen it. It is a matter of time, and probably, I mean, as you will see, is a matter of as well how we conceptualize and practice it. So there's different kind of like research on smart cities. So it's still an early age in a way, and we have technology-driven city, but now we have smart city-driven. So there's Smart City Summit, there's Smart City Index, there's City in Motion Index. There's a lot of things that are showing the capability to realize ideas that previously were mostly vision, but today we have the means to make those visions, those very large visions, true. And so what we see since 2009 is more like a smart city solution that are supply-driven. But as well, there's a sort of kind of demand pool as well. So the key question is no longer a technological one, but it's kind of an organizational one. So will we have a smart city bubble? What does it mean to have a smart city bubble? So if we were presented with a smart city neighborhood or design in the world, how would you know? How would you kind of make an informed decision as to whether it is or not a smart city design? So there's different kind of like evaluation framework. For example, there's you can see it from a governance point of view. Some kind of like example of implication and involvement of the civil society. There's different way of doing this. These are a few examples from the West in a way. So there are strong kind of like citizen kind of civil society, or weak, or kind of like business political coalition and so on. So we can look at the question of government or private sector, or we can look at integration with private society, with civil society, sorry. And as well, we can look at that integration from new institutional economics in a way, the traditional management of common property been shown in kind of the last 20 years to deliver better values than monopoly, either from the state or from the private sector. But this is relatively new. So we can look at as well as a smart city as a 0 to 1 kind of startup. So what's a startup? A startup, there is no formula. The formula for innovation, there's not such a thing yet, but people find value in different kind of like place in a way. There is as well kind of worldwide studies that shows that value come in every society in three types. Two of them we know quite well. Is the value in exchange, so what something is worth and is easy to understand. Is there's value in use, how people may use it. But there's another value that is kind of like probably, I mean, something that is most found in cities is value in common. Values that we share that are not paid for and I pay for everybody to kind of like share. So it's kind of a value in common is kind of what is ethically good. So what should we do that is kind of like good? Now, most startups are focusing on value in exchange or value in use. There's very few startups that kind of focus on value in common. So maybe this is something to come. There's as well, I mean, emerging a wide set of indicators which are emerging standards. So you can see that they are not very old. They are like from 2016 to 2018. You can see the number of indicators that some of them have. There are quite a lot of them. So I'm not sure that if you have a lot of indicators, that make it easy to recognize a smart city, but it's a start. This is the only slide I have with so many numbers, but just focus on the very last column, the green and the yellow column in a way. So that shows a little bit what are the focus by sector. So you can see that there's many sectors where smart city can be applied and many indicators that can kind of like try to capture them. But as well, there's, if we look at kind of like input or process or outcome, and most importantly, impact, we can see that, I mean, at the moment, I mean, while output and impact are relatively sort of covered, input and process are much less in a way. So how can we know we're doing something smart so we don't have a sense of input and process in a way? So these are questions to be kind of like asked in a way. Is, for example, the Sustainable Development Goal have a monitoring guide that provide extensive metadata to support assessment. But they say that most of the indicators are not feasible yet. So question of like, how do we use indicators if they are not feasible? There is as well an example of Smart London. So you have an impact which is about, I mean, the impact of improving the life of the Londoners. So that's kind of like the end impact, the long-term impact. But you have as well, I mean, the smart city from a point of view of like a mega project. A mega project which is a large-scale, complex venture that typically have a cost of at least $1 billion and take many years to develop and build and involve multiple public and private stakeholders, usually involving transnational financing and impact millions of people. So if we've been looking at a mega project, you will kind of realize that most of as a mega project, at least 80% are not in time and not in budget. That's not too bad if they are on target on benefit, but only 20% of those kind of mega projects are on target on benefit. So there's question about what makes a mega project successful. So some kind of like guru says that, I mean, there are kind of like a couple of criteria, so which is like, for example, replicable modularity in design. So it's like using modular design and kind of like as well speed to allow iteration in a way. So that the city can be, a smart city can be kind of like understood in that way. It depends. For example, the examples I take usually is like a modular kind of like metro system built in kind of like 8 years, which sounds kind of like a lot of time sometimes from this side of the world. And then the modularities is like no signature architecture, no new technology, and speed for iteration and learning. Is that smart? Question. So is the smart city the new urban norm, the new consensus? Should disruptive startup walk away from the consensus? If you want to be disruptive, if you want to be a startup, usually the idea is to kind of like walk away of that startup consensus. So what could it be? So we look at the 3 examples in a way of smart city. So this is the smartest neighborhood in the world. This is a kind of neighborhood in the South Netherlands. It's not small. It's not very big. It's got kind of like it's done by an architectural practice, which is kind of international UN studio, and the kind of like aim is relatively small and modest. It's the Netherlands. That's what it looks like. That's a smart city. And these are the programs that kind of like underlies the smart city in a way. So there are different line of area. So which kind of like concur with as well as the different kind of like indicators and standards that we talked about before. Then as well there is something that was to happen in Toronto, which was kind of led by the kind of subsidiary of Alphabet, Sidewalk Labs in a way. So it would have been kind of like to create a city or district in the internet area. What would that be? So the idea was to kind of create a new district. So how does it look like? This is quite an interesting aspect to kind of like understand. So if you look at what it looked like, it looked pretty much like, how to say, perhaps, I mean, a good part of New York, which is a relatively 19th century city, with a retrofit of new technology in a way. So there's an urban structure, there's an urban grain, there's social economic fabric, there's a public realm, there's density, there's height and massing, all the things that, in fact, I mean, good urban design know how to do in principle. And then there is institutional arrangement about data collection and the issue of the publicness of the data collection. There's other aspect. There's as well, I mean, the way of kind of like using AI to kind of understand how you can generate about kind of thousands of options and kind of involve maybe the citizen to kind of decide. Now, in fact, that didn't happen. Why? Well, a big shock happened, a big economic shock happened, and sometimes we forget about this. Is that it's difficult to predict sometimes what would happen to such a project. So at the end, I mean, because COVID and the economic shocks that ensue, this didn't kind of like happen. There was as well a great questioning about the kind of like property of the data that was to be collected. Now this is another city. This is kind of in South Korea. This is not far from an international airport. This is 56 kilometers from Seoul. It's got linked by urban rail. It's called green space. In a way, I mean, it's as well as, again, I mean, a smart city that borrow very kind of old city. New York, Central Park, Canal Side, which is something a reference to Venice waterway. There's cycling. There's all the things that we know of a city. Yet to be completed is kind of the largest smart city, which is a private real estate development. Started in 2001 with a population of today about 170,000 people, with a goal of 300,000, so this is about 60% achievement. Is as well the headquarters of the UN Green Climate Fund is there, and is a population of 300,000 over a country which is 52 million inhabitants. And this happened in kind of 23 years. So this is kind of like something to think. So the supply side versus the demand side. Do people want to live in a smart city? So some early known settlements. So there is kind of like a reference to relatively different type of city and different type of historical city. So, of course, there are a lot of things to improve on mobility and car. And what is interesting is, like, despite that this was a smart city, it was built according to very old standards. And the main standard were road standards, which were probably outdated. So one question is, like, how do we update standard and regulation. That's one of the big issues. So there's, to conclude, I would say there is some concern, like a privacy concern, like as well technological dependency, inequality. There's all those different concerns, but as well, there's a lot of potential. There's, I would say, that the smart city is contextual, but is an evolving concept. So there's smart city 1.0, 2.0, and so on. So we are only starting that journey. And then there's as well other aspects that may be alternative to smart city that has been touched upon already. And then those things can be as well complementing the smart city. So these are some kind of like, I would say, aspects that we should think about when we think about smart city. There's not one answer. It's contextual, it's time dependent, it's place dependent. So thank you for listening.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Thank you. Please take a seat.